This is Pat's Probe on the Our Lads Football Network. It's a new show where we are going to break down and examine every New England Patriots game through the 2020 season with Evan Lazar, Patriots beat reporter for CLNSmedia.com. Evan, it's good to talk to you again.
It's good to talk to you, Greg. I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. Me being a Jet fan, and I know I have to say that it's not like if you start listening to the show, you probably wouldn't figure that out. I'm talking about Patriot viewers and stuff, but I consider myself professional and impartial. And by the way, huge Michigan fan, and I've always been a huge Tom Brady fan.
Okay. Well, we got that, and we got some more Michigan guys now on the team too, with Chase Winovich and Josh
That's right.
Uche. So the Michigan legend lives on, even though Brady is no longer here.
And I'm a bit from New Jersey. I'm also a Rutgers fan, and we know there's a lot of Rutgers ties to New England, probably more than any other NFL team.
Yeah, absolutely. Devin McCourty, Jason McCourty, obviously. Not as many as there used to be when Logan Ryan and Duron Harmon were in the building also, but the coaching staff's got Rutgers ties. Steve Belichick, Bill Belichick's son is a Rutgers guy, so a lot of Rutgers always in New England.
All right, sounds good. By the way, what do you think? Do you think Logan has anything left? I know he hasn't been with the team for a few years, but do you think he's worth $7.5 million? That's what the Giants gave him, right?
It's a nice price tag for him, honestly. I thought it was a pretty decent contract given the time of year that he was signing. I think the one thing about Logan Ryan that always stood out was obviously football IQ to play multiple spots, usually inside guy, slot, nickel type of corner, but definitely the football IQ and the tackling ability. I know you don't love to hear that your corners are good at tackling because it usually means that they're giving up catches, but he's a really sound tackler, whether it's against the runner in space on catches after the catch, and he's really good at just limiting receivers to the amount of yards that they got from the original catch. So I think that that's really something that the Giants could benefit from a lot, is having a little bit more of a sure tackling approach on the back end.
Yeah, and I would think a lot of Patriot fans would be very interested to see how everything goes for the Giants and Joe Judge, and going to be very difficult for Joe. I was talking to Ryan Dunleavy on our other show about how we agreed that Joe Judge has got the toughest job of any other coach in the NFL based on the COVID offseason, first time head coach, new head coach of a new team. I don't think, and young quarterback, I don't think any coach of all the 32 NFL head coaches is going to have a tougher time this season based on the offseason we had.
Yeah, I think in New England, Joe Judge kind of got a bad rap last year because he was coaching wide receivers. It obviously wasn't a position that really fared very well for the Patriots last season, and it was kind of, the hot button topic of how the wide receivers really struggled. And then the guy that was the wide receivers coach / special teams coordinator, which is really the more important title here, gets a head coaching job. But I think the one thing that stood out with Judge, just talking to him and being around him, was just how smart of a guy he is. He really understands the game of football from all angles, not just offense, not just defense, not just special teams. He understands the whole puzzle, and you could ask him questions about any piece of the team, any component of the team, and he would have a really smart answer for you. So just a student of the game, a guy that's really detail oriented, not too far off the beaten path from Belichick, I would say.
And you have to also have some talent at the wide receiver position. It's not all coaching. And besides, Joe Judge, really, if you look at Judge, you're not looking at him and his resume as a wide receiver coach. You look at his resume as a special teams coach. And Patriots had the best special teams in football last year. At least it appeared to me. Maybe of course the kicking, the place kicking, and punting is a different thing. But everything else associated with special teams was probably top notch.
Yeah, it really was. The field goal kicking, like you said, was hit or miss until they got Nick Folk in the building, and then he kind of stabilized that position. But in terms of coverage, I think that's one thing the Patriots always stand out in, is punt coverage, kickoff coverage, and then also last year really producing points on special teams too with blocked punts. They blocked a couple different punts. I think they had 3 or 4 punt return touchdowns from blocked punts, not just returns from the guy that's deep, but actually blocking the kick and then running it into the end zone. They had one against Buffalo, and I believe it was Matthew Slater that ran that one in. Then Chase Winovich ran one in against the Giants. I'm sure that you remember that one. So there was a lot of different plays being made, and they needed them. Really, last year, they needed to be a dominant special teams unit so that they could flip field position and they could control the game and the kicking game, because their offense was struggling a lot. So they needed to play that sort of ball possession, field position type of game. And that is exactly what the special teams allowed them to do. They obviously had rookie punter Jake Bailey too, who's now in his second season, who has an absolute boomer of a leg, and he's really good at flipping field position as well. So Slater, Justin Bethel, Terrence Brooks, John Jones. I mean, there's a long list of guys, and obviously, guys that have moved on too, like a Nate Ebner. There's a lot of guys that really do very well on special teams for the Patriots over the
Yeah,
years.
and on this show this week, we're going to preview the season for the Patriots and take a look back from what happened as far as cuts and key positions. And we might as well, and of course, next week we'll get into recapping games on a weekly basis. Of course, starting with Miami, we'll have a special guest, Alan Poupart, who covers the Patriots for Sports Illustrated, Dolphin Digest. So we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But we might as well start with the kicking game because that is still a mystery. The rookie did not make it, at least for right now. We don't know if the rookie's going to make it. But what is the situation for the New England Patriots and place kicker? Do they have something under? Do they have an Adam Vinatieri up their sleeves, or is there something else going on?
Well, I think the cool thing about the kicker position for the Patriots right now is that this really does feel like roster manipulation by Bill Belichick. And I think what you find out, especially during cutdown weekend and then early in the season, oftentimes it's hard to get a position player through the waiver process and onto the practice squad, where it's a lot easier to find a roster spot for a kicker, let's say a month from now when there's an injury, somebody goes down with an injury and it frees up a roster spot, or somebody's not playing particularly well or not playing at all just because of the depth chart, and they're able to move guys around then. And I think it becomes easier than doing it in sort of the wave of cut downs on Saturday this year, obviously. It kind of gets lost in translation a little bit there. So what Bill Belichick's doing right now, I think, is more gamesmanship than anything. So their new rule this year with the collective bargaining agreement, that you can promote two guys from the practice squad on game day and make them active on the game for the game and not have them on the 53-man roster. So
Hmm.
essentially, for the 24 hours of the game, you have 55 spots for guys that can be active on game day because you can call up those two practice squatters. So what the Patriots can do is Saturday night before the game, they can call up Nick Folk or Justin Rohrwasser, get those guys on that 55-man game day roster, and then activate them on game day to the 46, and then they can play on Sunday and kick in the game. Then they can then go ahead and send them back down to the practice squad after that if they so choose, and they don't have to pass through waivers because of this new rule. So that's what's going on here. It's a lot of gamesmanship by Belichick. I think there were certain players on their 53 that they wanted to keep around. They kept 10 offensive linemen, for example, and I think some of those rookie offensive linemen like Michael Onwenu or Justin Herron are players that showed a lot of promise in camp that they wanted to stick around, and they were concerned that if they released them, that they would get claimed on waivers. So I
Yeah.
think that was a big part of it. Guys like Derek Rivers, for instance, or Jacoby Myers or Damari Bird, or some of these receivers that they were able to keep around. A lot of those guys, I think, might have been on the outside looking in if they didn't have that extra spot for the kicker, on the roster.
Okay.
So a little bit of gamesmanship here for Belichick. He's got two kickers, so he's got that insurance, right? If one of them gets claimed off of the practice squad at some point or something like that, he's always got the other guy. He claims that both guys are NFL ready, NFL talents at that position. We saw Justin Rohrwasser kick a lot in training camp, and it was kind of a disaster. The rookie kicker, that is kind of a disaster, quite honestly. He was 12 for 22 on
Oh,
kicks. The ball flying all over the place on him. Sometimes it was left, sometimes it was right. There was really no rhyme or reason to any of his misses, which is obviously a concern. So I don't know if I believe Belichick that they're both NFL talent. That's what he claims, and we'll see how it goes. But I think it's going to be Folk at the end of the day,
it
and
sounds
I'm
like
sure
it.
yeah, and I'm sure we'll find out about that roster transaction, promoting him from the practice squad either
Okay.
late Saturday night or early Sunday
And
morning.
I've always been a big Folk fan, being a former Jet. Folk was, he may not have been the elite, consistent guy, but boy, he was 90% money when you needed him to be. And that's obviously real important when you have a championship type team. And whether you believe the Patriots have a championship type team or not, that's a good weapon to have on your team when you need a kick at the end. You're definitely not going to want to rely on an erratic rookie when you can go to someone like Nick Folk. And the only thing that's really prevented Folk from still being steady the last few years have been injuries. So I'm assuming he's healthy.
Yeah, he's healthy, and last year, like I said, really stabilized that position for them. He was 12 for 12 on extra points. I think he only missed one or two field goals, and both of them were from distance. So it wasn't. It was a position where it was Stephen Gostkowski early on in the season last year, was just signed by the Titans. He really struggled, and then it turned out that he had a hip injury that was leading to some of those struggles. So he went on injured reserve. They brought in Mike Nugent, who was an absolute disaster for a couple of weeks, and they finally found Folk, and that was really where they were able to stabilize that position and get what they needed out of that spot. I think the hardest part about predicting kicking in New England, and one of the reasons why they drafted Rohrwasser, is that the weather is so terrible here in the wintertime that you need a kicker that can kick in the rain, that can kick in the snow, that can kick in the wind, and all these other types of conditions. And it's very unpredictable, the weather here also in New England. So the forecast could say Sunday morning that it's going to be this clear sunny day, and then you get to kickoff and it's raining or it's windy or whatever the case may
Yep.
be. So it's a lot of unpredictable factors with the weather. And Rohrwasser was a guy that kicked well in weather during his college career at Marshall specifically. So they were really liking that about him. And then Folk has obviously shown last year that he can handle those responsibilities. So it's not an easy place to kick, especially when they're kicking at Gillette. So it's that's really a big part of this decision. It's a wacky stadium. It's a horseshoe, and the way that the ball comes off the foot going to the open end versus the closed end is very different. The weather is very different every single week. So it's a tough place to kick, and it takes a really consistent and mentally tough kicker to do it.
Okay, now getting back to this gamesmanship with the kicking game and practice squad, give me a player or two. Probably you could just say one. Let's just say these were the old rules, and one of these kickers was on the team. Which player do you think would not make it? Give me a name or two.
That's a good question. I think the two guys that I would look at first and foremost are one of those rookie offensive linemen that I mentioned, Heron or Onwenu, who they drafted in the 6th round in
Would they
April.
have made
Who
the practice squad?
they made the actual
Well,
roster,
but I
and I
mean,
think
under
that
this situation, you think that would have bumped into the practice squad then?
yeah, I think that they probably one of those guys I think ends up getting waived. They carried 10 offensive linemen, which is a ton, right? You normally only have 7, and now this year there's another rule that allows you to have 8 offensive linemen active on game day. So they're carrying at least 2 or 3 extra bodies
Okay.
than just compared to the guys that they're going to even have active for the game. I think the reason why they did that was that really in camp they were extremely impressed with the 2 rookies, and Heron's got a little bit of guard tackle versatility. He can move around a little bit. He's a very good pass protector. Onwenu is the type of guy that's more of a bulldozer. He's 350 pounds, and he can really move guys in the running game, and they really like that on the right side specifically. Shaq Mason's their starting right guard right now, and he's one of the best run blockers in the league. And that's sort of a position that they want a bulldozer at. They want a guy that they can just, blow guys off the ball with. And Onwenu has that sort of trait about him and sort of skill set about him. So they're really high on both those guys. The other one I would kind of look at is 2017 third-round pick Derek Rivers, who has had multiple knee injuries that have cost him seasons in his first 3 seasons. 2 out of 3 years he was cut from the team or put on injured reserve because of injuries. And then this year he finally shows back up at camp. Belichick was really kind of complimentary of him, I would say, which is not always the case. And he said, he's more explosive, he's bigger, he's just a better football player this year than what he was the past 3 years. So he really has sort of come into his own, and they certainly need him to because they've lost Van Noy, they lost
Yep.
Hightower, they lost Jamie Collins. So they need a linebacker, an outside linebacker, an edge rusher to really step up and fill those shoes. And maybe Derek Rivers ends up being that guy. So I think those are a couple of names there that if the kicker was on the roster, one of those guys probably gets knocked off, and you never know if they get back to your practice squad or not.
By the way, it looks like the Patriots personnel wise seem more likely to be a 3-4 team than in previous years. We in the old days it was always 3-4 with Belichick. Then in recent
Right.
years, as you know, of course, they decide personnel wise, whatever the reason, 4-3, 3-4, and a lot more 4-3 than we've seen ever before in Belichick's career. But just looking at at who made the 53 man, just taking a look at the players on the depth chart at ourlads.com, it just seems like these are definite 3-4 fits.
Well, That's what they were last year, and they had the boogeymen last year. Those guys I just mentioned, Van Noy, Hightower, Collins, Landon Roberts, who's also gone now too. They had a ton of linebackers, right? And then they had guys like Winovich and Simon who could play on the line of scrimmage. So they were a 3-4 team last year, and that was really their base defense. Now, of course, Belichick's always kind of evolving and shifting
Yep,
fronts,
yep.
and sometimes they're odd fronts, sometimes they're even fronts. You know, he's got different pass rush type of fronts that he brings in, where there's 5 guys across or 4 guys across, and some of them are standing up, some of them have their
Yeah.
hand in the dirt. So it's a lot going on,
Uh-huh.
right? But I think the basis of their scheme has always sort of been a two gapping 3-4, but he's obviously always evolving with the personnel. And really, we were going to talk about it, I think, with Bo Allen going on injured reserve, their nose tackle. It kind of signals to me that they might actually be better suited now for a 4-3 because they don't have that true two gapping nose tackle to play over the center right now. Lawrence Guy can do that, but I don't know if that's necessarily the best usage of his skill set. And you really want to unlock him to go ahead and make plays behind the line of scrimmage. Whereas with a nose tackle, you're kind of just eating blocks in the middle of the defense. So I don't know if they're going to be a 3-4 or 4-3. I'm sure it'll be able a little bit of both. But with their linebacker depth being what it is, with Bo Allen going on IR, it does signal to me that maybe a 4-3 front where they don't have to rely on linebacker depth as much might be a little bit better. But at the end
Hmm.
of the day, I think that they're going to be pretty much everything.
Okay.
Like they always
Yep.
are. And really, it's just first down that we're talking about too.
Yeah.
They kind of get out of their base stuff once they get into a passing situation. It's sort of those amoeba fronts. It's the different looks that they're going to send at the quarterback.
Now, getting back to the offensive line, how is the transition from Scarnecchia going, and who is going to be the starting right tackle?
Well, I think that that's sort of one of the things that's been the most surprising thing to me, this at least in training camp, and we'll see how it turns out during the season, is that they really haven't missed a beat on the offensive line without Skarnecki. And I think Cole Popovich and Carmen Brasillo being kind of tutelaged under Scar. He was kind of their mentor, so to speak. I think that was a big reason why, is because they basically carried over the same system that they were running with Skarnecchia, just with these two new coaches, and they've learned how to coach up the system and teach the system through the best guy that's ever done it, right? So I think that that's a big benefit to them right now, is that they're really not starting over at all at that position. They're just kind of continuing what was working. They also have 4 returning starters, which is
Yeah.
a big help,
Yeah.
right? Isaiah Wynn, Joe Tooney, Shaq Mason, David Andrews. You have those 4 guys, and 3 of those guys on the interior that are veteran players that have been in the system, that are all getting second contracts now. And Andrews is obviously the captain, the guy in the middle. So that's a big, big help to have that veteran
Yep.
experience. They just signed Tooney on the tag. Shaq Mason got an extension. Andrews has gotten an extension already in his career with the Patriots. So those are veteran guys that have been around the block, that have been in this system for years, and really are comfortable with it. To answer the question about right tackle, it's going to be Jermaine Illuminor, who they traded with Baltimore last year, right after cutdowns or right before cutdowns. I can't remember. It was the beginning of September. They traded a pick and did a pick swap with Baltimore to acquire Jermaine Illuminor, who basically rode the bench all last season behind Marcus Cannon, the starter there at right tackle, who opted out obviously this season. And now they're going to bring in Illuminor, and he really performed extremely well in camp. I think he was a little bit better than people expected. And the one thing that he said, talking to him in the press conferences, was that he kind of lost his motivation once he got to the NFL. He sort of thought he made it. He kind of was content with just making it to the league and didn't really feel like he needed to push himself. Now he realizes that if he doesn't push himself and he doesn't kind of go that extra mile, that he's not going to be in the league for much longer. So he's a little bit more motivated. He's in better shape, which was a concern for him in Baltimore and last year with the Patriots. And he's playing a lot better out there in camp and in practice. And I think that, Cannon, who's been a really, really good Patriot for a long time, his foot speed and his ability to get out in space was limited last year. He's slowing down a little bit, I think, at his age. And Illuminor looks a little bit more athletic, a little bit younger, a little bit more fresh. I think the Patriots are optimistic that maybe not an upgrade, but certainly going to be able to hold his own there at that right
I,
tackle
I
spot.
remember when he came into the league. Obviously, we do so much draft coverage here on this network that he
Yeah.
was a project. He was a guy that
Yeah.
didn't wasn't going to be a blue chip right off the bat, but he was somebody that, hey, you know what? Give him 2 or 3 years and watch out. And he had starter material. So it's not really a surprise. Now, a lot of times these kids just fall off the wayside. They don't make it. They get to another team, just doesn't work out. But it's, this is his opportunity, like you said, and there is a chance. I mean, he has talent.
Yeah, exactly. And I, spoken to some O-line guys like Brandon Thorne and Duke Manyweather about Illuminor, who's been around. He's been in those O-line mastermind type meetings and stuff like that with other offensive linemen. As a guy that's not really that decorated, a lot of people in the O-line community really think very highly of him, which I think says a lot. And really, the only thing that was a major concern for him last year and past in his Baltimore career was conditioning and was endurance and was his ability to go out there and do it for 4 quarters. Because the flashes and the moments, you could clearly see this guy's athletic. He's very, very strong. He's got a good upper body, good chest. You're not going to really run through him or anything like that or bull rush him at the point of attack. And he can really move people in the run game and can be athletic and get out in space a little bit. But he had to put it all together and he had to be able to do it for 4 quarters. And at the NFL level, that's sort of what separates, the goods from the greats and the guys that make it and the guys that don't. Whereas in college, a guy like Illuminor can kind of get away with just his raw, abilities, right? And in the NFL, it doesn't really always work out that way. So he's sort of coming into his own. I think he's refocused. I think that he realizes that if he doesn't kind of pick it up, that he's not going to be in the league for much longer. He's not going to, they're not going to constantly keep on taking chances on a guy that can't get up to speed, that can't be conditioned properly and all that sort of thing. So he's refocused, re-energized, and he's really played extremely well for the Patriots, and they're very happy with him.
Okay, now let's quickly run through some of the players, the fringe players. We know about the superstars and the household names. Starting on the offensive line, quickly about last year's 2019 linemen, Cajuste and Froholt.
Yeah, Cajuste is having a tough time right now. I don't know how he's looked in the last week or so since it's close to the media, but the first, 2 weeks of training camp that we got to see them, Cajuste is really just kind of rusty right now. He was out of football all of last year with the Patriots. He was on injured reserve from the get-go, basically a redshirt season for him. So he hasn't played in an actual football game since January of 2019 with West Virginia. So basically the 2018 season. So he's just really rusty out there right now. His technique is not very good at the moment. He's kind of being a little bit sloppy with his footwork and with his hands. So they're just trying to get him back into sort of a groove and back into a comfortable spot. He was sort of the guy that they had penciled in at right tackle. I think they wanted him to win the job. They came to camp and he's just not ready for it. As for Froholt, he's really taken it into his own or gotten into his own in the second season here. He's looking like a future starter in the interior for the Patriots, and he's kind of in that mold. He didn't play tackle in college like Tooney did, but he's sort of more in that Tooney mold of athletic, good pass protector, decent run blocker, but really more known for being able to mirror guys inside and take care of those inside rushers that are dominating the league lately. So he looks really good. He was a little bit sloppy with his technique as well in his rookie season. He took a lot of penalties in his rookie preseason, just grabbing at guys and lunging at guys. He seems to be cleaning all of that up a lot this year. So a little bit smarter, a little bit faster, playing more aggressive style of football. I think that he's just sort of kind of more comfortable with the NFL game and the NFL speed and what the Patriots are asking of him, and it's really paying dividends on the field. So he's not going to see the field this year unless there's an injury to those starters on the interior, which the Patriots are really hoping doesn't happen. But next year or maybe the year after that when they move on from Shaq Mason eventually or Joe Tooney eventually, I think that Froholt has a really good chance to be a starting guard for the Pats down the road.
Okay, who's the starting tight end? And by the end of the season, who do you think is going to end up with the most snaps at tight end?
Well, the starting tight end is going to be Ryan Izzo, and I would say that he's probably going to have the most snaps at the end of the day, too. And the season that we all keep on going back to in Patriot land is that 2010 season, Gronk and Aaron Hernandez's rookie year. Those two guys really didn't play a whole lot. They played on third down, they played red zone, and they were just so uniquely talented players in Hall of Fame caliber in Gronk's case that they had great production in the a little bit of time that they played. The guy that was really taking the lion's share of the snaps that year was actually a veteran, Algie Crumpler, a guy that was towards the end of his career. Izzo doesn't exactly fit that mold, but I think that he's going to play something like 50% of the snaps. He's really the only tight end right now on the Patriots roster because they have the two rookies behind him that knows what he's doing and understands where he's supposed to be going and understands the playbook and understands the terminology and all that kind of stuff. So Devin Asiasi, I think, is going to be, at the end of the day, the player that has the most production out of that tight end spot. You're looking for a fantasy tight end on the Patriots, it should be Asiasi, but I think that Izzo is actually going to outsnap both him and Dalton Keene. But at the end of the day, once the season's over, to answer that part of your question, I think it will definitely end up being Asiasi who's at the top of that list.
All right. Running back. So tell me, with Damian Harris on IR, Tell me a little bit about one of these. Well, actually, he's a fullback, Jakob Johnson, the only true fullback on the roster. Where did he come from, and how did he make the team?
Well, Jakob Johnson was on the team last year, but he came through the International Pathway Program, which is
Oh,
a program that they put in place in the NFL for foreign players.
is
So
he the only
he
one that made it?
is from the Europe. He's the only one so far that has ever made the 53-man roster in the history of the program. Now, the program has only been around, I think, for 5 or 6 years, so
uh,
it's not like it's been around for 50 years. And he's the only guy that's made it, but he's the only guy so far that has made it. He's German born, and he played in Germany up to all the way almost till college, and then he came over here in the States, I believe, his senior year of high school, and then into college. And he played actually defensive end in college, but now he's playing fullback for the Patriots. And he's your prototypical sledgehammering fullback. We're going to get into the I formation. He's going to be the lead blocker. He's going to blow up the linebacker in the hole and open up space for the running back. The Patriots have really relied on that, what they call 21 personnel, with the fullback in the backfield and the back behind him, a lot. They've ridden that package basically the last 2 seasons as sort of their base offense, with Tom Brady at that stage of his career really being at his best in the play action passing game, hard play fakes from under center, and using that to mitigate some of the separation issues that they had at receiver and allow Brady to have some open passing windows. That's been a big part of their offense. I don't know how much big of a part that's going to be with Cam, because he's not really that style of quarterback, right? You're not really going to love putting Cam under center too often. It's not really something that he's done all
sure.
that much. So I don't know if that's going to be a big role for Jakob Johnson moving forward, if he's going to kind of transition to more of an H back, running some full house packages or something like that with two backs in the backfield out of the gun or out of the pistol,
Okay.
or whatever the case may be. Maybe that's the direction they go in it with it. But in terms of the running back position, Damien Harris ends up on IR. He had a great camp. It's really disappointing, honestly, to see him end up there, because I think he was going to sort of break out here in the first month of
Hmm.
the season and maybe take that running back job by storm. But now it's going to end up being the same committee that it was last year with Sony Michel and James White and Rex Burkhead. They're all going to kind of have a hand in the fight there, and kind of rotate through those guys like a committee, which I know fantasy football fans hate to
Oh
hear.
yeah.
It's really not
Patriots,
going to
that's
be.
not a good team for fantasy football running backs. That's not where you want
No.
to go. But what you're saying though is keep an eye on the time clock for Damian Harris. If is it because there is a chance he comes back this year?
Absolutely. He's definitely going to come back. So he broke his pinky in practice. It's going to be about a month injury. He had surgery last Monday. So he's looking at, coming back around weeks 3 or 4 of the
Oh,
regular
okay.
season.
So that's
So
good.
he's going to be right back in the mix. The one cool thing about the IR rule this year, because of COVID, is that you only have to spend 3 weeks on
Yeah.
injured reserve instead of 8. So he's going to come back as soon as I think that window is over. And right now it's just about creating a roster spot. They called up JJ Taylor in his place, the undrafted rookie running back who had a really nice camp. So he gets some opportunity with Damon Harris going down. But Harris was the best back the Patriots had in camp, better than Michelle, better than Burkhead, better than White. His really bursts and kind of explosiveness as a ball carrier, and just all around abilities. At Bama, we saw him be able to catch the ball out of the backfield a little bit, run routes from different alignments, and also run the ball, obviously. So he can do it all. And I think that sort of skill set is something that the Patriots wanted out of Burkhead, and he's done that. They wanted out of Michelle, and he hasn't been able to do that. But having a guy that can do it all at a high level, I think, is sort of that next step for that Patriots backfield. And Damien Harris is definitely their best bet.
All right. So I might have to pick him up in a week or two, a couple of weeks before he becomes healthy again, and maybe steal him off the waiver wire, because I'm sure he's on the waiver wire in my league and in a lot of leagues. Okay. I tell you what, let's talk about Cam and this offense. Because when I was doing the previews with a couple different shows, the one thing against me thinking or predicting that the Patriots were going to have a successful season was predicting that Cam Newton was going to stay healthy. That's it.
Right.
I believe if he stays healthy, that with this coaching staff, and still the offensive line is going to be solid, that they're going to be, and Cam Newton's still a spectacular player when he's healthy. But that's the trick with me is can he stay healthy? So how is the offense going to be different? Even starting week 1, what are we going to see that might be a little bit different right away?
I think we're going to see a lot of different. The question just really is how much can they cram in this short period of time to get everybody up to speed in the type of offense that they want to be with Cam. But I think the big thing with, this whole offseason, you sort of look at their personnel on offense. They have a great offensive line. They have a really good group of running backs. And they have bigger receivers that are willing run blockers, but aren't necessarily known for speed or separation, which is obviously a concern for this team moving forward. But the one thing that sort of signaled ahead with all those things was that a mobile quarterback was probably what was best for this
Yeah,
offense.
exactly.
Not a guy that was just going to stand there like Brady and sort of go through his progression as quickly as Brady does it, and as good as Brady is with ball placement and accuracy and timing and all that stuff. They don't have those types of receivers anymore.
Yep.
They have N'Keal Harry, they have Gunnar Olszewski, they have Julian Edelman. Obviously, those are going to kind of be the top three, and then you have guys like the tight ends and Jakob Johnson, who we mentioned, and they have guys that really fit better in more of a run first mobile quarterback type of scheme. So I think what we're going to see is a lot of those types of schemes that we've seen in Carolina with Cam, or we've seen in Baltimore with Lamar Jackson, or San Francisco with Cap, or whatever the case may be, where they're running zone read, they're running RPOs, they're running some gap read concepts, some quarterback draws, and different quarterback running plays. Right now on their roster, and he'd be this on a lot of rosters, but for the Patriots specifically, Cam is the best short yardage ball carrier that they have by far. He's the guy that if it's 4th and 1 or it's on the goal line and they need to punch the ball in,
Yeah.
I'm not turning it around and giving it to James White or Rex Burkhead or Sony. Just run Cam right up the middle. That's really their best bet to score on the goal line, or their best bet to convert a third and half a yard at this point in time. So I think there's going to be a lot of sort of Cam running elements to this offense. Really, just the question is how quickly can they adapt the offense, and how quickly can they install all those packages. This is an offense that has a plan that we can see. Do they have the talent on the outside at receiver? That's really the biggest question mark. And when everything sort of comes down to it, when it's the fourth quarter and they need to put a drive together and they need to go to more of like a traditional passing offense, are they going to be able to have enough to have Cam just stand there in the shotgun with 5 eligible wide
Yep.
receivers and be able to spread the ball around? I don't know if they're going to be able to be that sort of offense, but if they can be an offense that's really playing from out in front, that has the lead often, leans on that defense to build that lead, and can really run the football, then they can sort of score points, I think, with that sort of Baltimore, Carolina, 49ers, that kind of attack. It's a suitable system. It's a suitable way to go. The question just really is, it's probably not going to look pretty right away. It's probably more going to be what it is in November and December than what it is in September, which is what the Patriots want anyways.
All right. Speaking of those receivers, tell me a little bit about Gunnar Olszewski.
Got it.
And is he special teams mostly, sort of like a Slater deal? And then really, there's not a lot of depth. Same kind of group from last year. Nobody new. Sanu's out. They're gonna. It looks like to me they're hoping that Bird, who had a mini kind of breakthrough last year with Arizona, can continue the progression there. That Myers gets better, and obviously that Harry gets better, because Edelman is the only receiver, wide receiver or tight end receiver position that the Patriots can count on right now.
Exactly. It's Julian Edelman and a bunch of guys right now. That's sort of been the mantra all summer in Boston, all camp in Boston. But I think the biggest thing when you look at this receiving core, you mentioned Damari Bird. He's the one new face. He's replacing Philip Dorsett in this offense as that one guy that can really run on the outside. He's got 4.25 speed. He can really fly. So they're hoping that they're going to get a little bit more than what they got at Dorsett, because Bird's a little bit more well-rounded. He's a guy that you can throw the ball to on a short route, and he can take it after the catch, and he's got like punt return skills in space, whereas Dorsett was really not a very good yak receiver. After the catch guy was not really his strength. So they're hoping they can get more out of that from Bird, but the guys that they're really just kind of counting on now are those first and second year players, both at tight end and wide receiver that we've mentioned. N'Keal Harry, Gunnar Olszewski, Jakobi Meyers, the rookie tight ends, those guys taking that leap, taking that step in their second season, specifically at wide receiver. That's what the Patriots need. That's what they're counting on, specifically N'Keal Harry, who has looked at times decent in camp, he still has the same issues, right? He's not the fastest guy out there. He's not going to create loads of separation. But the one thing that we've seen in Cam was he's gotten a little bit better at the line of scrimmage with his route releases, which has allowed him to create throwing windows down the field for contested catches. So him and Cam have worked pretty well on back shoulders, high point fades, jump balls, things like that down the field, where you just kind of throw it to a spot and you count on Harry to box the guy out
Yep.
and make a catch and make an adjustment. That's sort of his skill set. You combine that with the fact that he can really run with the football as well. So they'll find ways, whether it's behind the line of scrimmage, reverses, or little kind of gadget type of plays to get the ball in his hands that way to help him produce there. But down the field is really where they need to see the most production from him, or the biggest step forward from him. And that's going to have to come with those contested catches. And I think the one benefit from having a guy like Cam is two things. One, he's a little bit more, let's say, he's easier to play with than Tom Brady, especially for a young receiver. With
Yeah.
Brady, for everything that he was great at, he was very, very much a guy that would knock you out of the circle of trust very quickly as a young receiver if you weren't in the right place at the right time, running the routes the way he wanted you to run the routes. Right. And that was a big kind of concern that they had with the young receivers last year with Brady, is just he kind of didn't have a willingness to work with those guys and work through the growing pains and work through the issues that they had, because he, rightfully so, at his age, was all in of winning now. He's not really in the business of developing guys
Yep.
anymore. Right. So that's totally fair. With Cam, he's a little bit more open to that. The second thing that Cam is a little bit better for, I think, is that if you look at his history in Carolina, guys like Devin Funches, Kelvin Benjamin, the tight ends he's thrown to there in the past, like Greg Olsen, he's really thrived with bigger receivers in the past. That's sort of been their MO down there in Carolina, is surrounding him. Toward the end of the career, he kind of got DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel and some faster guys, but when he was in his prime in his MVP season,
Yep.
he was throwing to big body pass catchers. And I think that they're hoping that they can sort of do that same exact thing with N'Keal Harry. And he's kind of Cam's, Kelvin Benjamin or Cam's Devin Funches this year, as just a guy that can go up and get it. So we saw that a little bit in training camp. I think we'll continue to see that. But at the line of scrimmage is the key for Harry. He's got to be able to get off the line, get opened up, get up the field, and then set things up off of that with the defender on his back. And I think that that's sort of what he's worked on all offseason, and that's what the Patriots are counting on.
Okay, less than 10 minutes. Two quick things on offense and then the rest on defense. Back to Gunner. What's his role?
So Gunnar Olszewski last year was a punt return specialist for the Patriots. He's kind of taken the Julian Edelman sort of career arc here, where Edelman early on in his career was behind Wes Welker, similar situation, and he was just returning punts in games and kind of dressing as a third or fourth or fifth wide receiver. And then so slowly but surely, he sort of carved out an opportunity for himself, and then eventually surpassed Welker, and ended up replacing Welker. So I don't know if that's going to happen with Gunner. And obviously saying that Gunner is going to be as good as Welker or Julian Edelman is a little bit lofty. But I think the one thing that we've seen throughout camp with Gunner this year, last year, this guy looked like they picked him up literally from Foxborough High School.
Yeah.
They could have gotten him off the street and I wouldn't have been surprised. He just didn't have an NFL body. He just wasn't big enough. He wasn't strong enough. This year, he's really focused himself in the offseason on his training, on his fitness, on his body, and he looks more explosive. He looks bigger. He looks more physical out there, and his route running and his burst in his routes has really improved a lot. So he's taken a huge step forward, I would say, from this year compared to last year, his rookie season. And they're hoping that he's going to be able to play on offense. I don't think that this is just going to be a punt return guy this year. I think that they're hoping that he's going to eventually be the third receiver with Edelman and N'Keal Harry as sort of that Z slot type of option that can play inside, can play outside, and maybe add a little bit of burst and explosiveness to this receiving core that desperately needs it. So he's taken a huge step forward this season. I think that they're really optimistic that he's going to continue to do that. And again, it's really about reinventing the body, because he was just really scrawny, really small as a rookie, got pushed around a lot, and now he's playing a little bit more physical and he's a little bit more sure of himself out there.
And he's still #1 punt returner?
I would think so. That's really the direction that it's been going in all summer. Edelman is going to get thrown back there when they absolutely need it on occasion, I think. But they obviously want to preserve him as much as possible. And I don't think that they have any interest in putting Edelman back on punt returns outside of, let's say, a playoff game or something like that. So I think that it's going to be Gunner most of the time the rest of the way, for sure.
If something happens to Cam Newton, who's off the bench first?
Whew, that's a good question. Listen. I think Brian Hoyer has actually ran the offense the best so far in camp. Believe it or not, even better than Cam Newton. But obviously, we know the kind of playmaking limitations you have with a
Sure.
guy like Brian Hoyer. He's not gonna. He doesn't have a great arm. He doesn't have that ability to push the ball down the field. He's gonna be a lot of kind of within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage and just sort of condense the entire offense. But in terms of getting the ball out on time, knowing where his answers are, knowing checks and audibles at the line of scrimmage, just knowing the system in general, Hoyer is definitely, and rightfully so. I mean, he's been in the system for almost a decade. He is much further along in that respect. So Stidham is just so inconsistent. One play you go out there and you say, okay, this guy's going to be, a future stud,
Yeah.
and then the next play is throwing an interception, or the ball's nowhere near his intended target, or it's out late, or whatever the case may be. It's just boom or bust with him. I think the inconsistency ends up giving him another year on the bench, and if Newton goes down or Newton's not playing well, I think they turn to Hoyer.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. On defense, we've already talked about some of the key players, especially up front. So, as far as the young kids, especially the two linebackers in the second and third rounds, who has stuck out either from this year's draft or even from some of the younger players, 2019, Byron Cowart, those guys, who's sticking out?
Byron Coward's definitely stuck out a little bit. I'm glad you brought him up because he's a run first defender, but he's actually developing pretty nicely as a pass rusher too. And Belichick actually called him one of the most explosive players on the team
Wow.
in the press conference a couple weeks ago. He's just a guy that can fire off the ball, and they don't have a ton of those guys, honestly, especially on the interior. They're more of the Lawrence Guy types that are kind of
Yeah.
just block eaters up front, and that's sort of their system. But a guy like Byron Coward can really penetrate and disrupt. And the one thing that you kind of look at with the absences at linebacker, with the opt outs and the free agent departures, they don't have a ton of splash players in that front seven anymore that can really make plays behind the line of scrimmage. Maybe Coward can be that sort of guy, but the guy that they're really counting on, I think, is really three guys in the last two draft classes: Winovich and Franny Jennings and Josh Uche. Those three guys need to grow up fast. They need to be productive players as young players for the Patriots. Uche specifically, I think, is someone that can add some of that splash. He might have some inconsistent moments. He's going to have some rookie brain fart, certainly, but he's got the athleticism and the explosiveness as a player, both on the line of scrimmage and off the line of scrimmage, to make plays sideline to sideline and get upfield and make tackles for loss or pressure the quarterback or whatever the case may be. So they really need those young linebackers to grow extremely fast here because of all the departures. And that's sort of been the biggest concern about this team is the front seven. How are they going to stop the run? How are they going to get pressure on the quarterback? They have this great secondary that can obviously aid them on all those things, but how are they going to be able to do that on a weekly basis is the biggest concern right now, especially at that second level of the defense. Because they do have Adam Butler, they do have Dietrich Wise, who are players that have been in the system and they're familiar with the way they do things. But at the second level, no Van Noy, no Collins, no Hightower. Who's going to be the one that's going to make the plays? And that's going to really come down to Bentley and the rookies.
Yeah, because if you look at it, last year Winovich played 28% of the snaps.
Right.
Let's see, you have Bentley 27%, Calhoun 26%, and that's it. And then you got all the rookies. So
Right.
several players, like you said, are going to have to take up the slack, not only play, but they're going to have to make plays because this was a very good defensive team last year. All right, we'll close in the last 2 minutes. We already know basically the starters, right? Phillips is going to be the other starter at safety, correct?
Well, I think that's an interesting one because it's
Not
probably
so
going to
fast, my friend.
it's probably going to be Phillips or Terrence Brooks just because of their veteran experience. I would say Brooks has looked really good in camp, and this is his
Okay.
second year in the system. And
He
in
was a
a
good
last
college player.
Yeah, he was a good college player at Florida State, and now he's playing really well for the Patriots in secondary. He just looks a lot more comfortable in his second season in the system than some of
Okay.
these other guys. But don't sleep on Kyle Duggar. I'm telling you now, this guy first week of training camp was absolute gangbusters. He was all over the field. He's playing up. He's playing in the back end. He was constantly near the football. Then they pulled him back a little bit. He had a little bit of an injury, but I think they were also they didn't want the rookie to get too high on himself too quickly, right? So they pulled him back just a little bit, I think, in the second week of training camp. But at some point in time, they're going to let Duggar loose. And he's a guy that's a supreme athlete. He has great instincts. He's just a little bit kind of underdeveloped because of where he played at Lionel
Okay.
Ryan Division II level, but he's a guy that lives near the football. And this defense, they have Gilmore, they have Devin McCourty, they have J.C. Jackson. Those guys are all playmakers on the back end. They need some front seven playmakers. Maybe Duggar as a strong safety. Box safety is a guy that can make some splash plays for them, cover some tight ends, cover the backs, and make some plays against the run when he's kept clean. He's going to be a player for this Patriots team at some point. I don't know
Sounds
if he's
good.
going to leapfrog the veterans now or next year, but he's going to be a playmaker. He's always around the football.
All right, and then in less than 60 seconds, just quickly between J.C. Jackson and Joanne Williams, the second-round pick last year, both those guys, who has better upside?
J.C. Jackson right now is statistically from PFF's coverage stats and things like that has actually been one of the best corners in the league the last 2 years. So he's a guy that they're really high on. He had a great camp as well and was sort of maybe the best player in camp, honestly, for the
Wow.
Patriots.
Okay.
He's played extremely well so far, and he's another ball hawk. You throw deep on J.C. Jackson 9 times out of 10, it's incomplete, and the other 4 times it's intercepted. So he's one of the better deep ball cornerbacks in the league.
Okay.
Throwing it down the field on him is a really difficult do. This season, they're really trying to develop the rest of his game so that he can cover the underneath stuff just as well as he covers the deep stuff. That's sort of what separates, like a Stephon Gilmore, of course, is Defensive Player of the Year. But that's what separates a guy like Gilmore from a guy like J.C. Jackson right now is that Gilmore can cover any type of route, any type of receiver at any time from any alignment, in the slot, outside, whatever. J.C. is more of a boundary receiver that covers deep threats on the outside. So they're trying to just get him a little bit more well-rounded, but he's going to get paid sometime at some point in the next year or two, whether it's here in New England or somewhere else.
And last one, quickly, Jonathan Jones. Is he the #1 slot corner?
Yeah, he's a good slot corner. Last year, the first 8-9 weeks of the season, he was arguably the best nickel in the entire league. He got hurt and really had a tough second half of the season, but he's going to be their top nickel. I think that him, J.C. Jackson, Jason McCourty, and Stephon Gilmore are all going to sort of be in a 3-man rotation, 4 guys for 3 spots. And we'll see what game plan and what kind of schemes they want to run in the secondary against certain opponents to decide, who plays more where and all that kind of stuff. But those 3 guys, those 4 guys are going to be all in the mix. And Jones is really a very productive slot corner. And to me, that's the toughest position to play in the secondary because receivers have all sorts of room inside, right? They can go vertical, they can go left, they can go right. You're covering a lot of grass when you're playing in the slot, and Jonathan Jones does it really, really well.
Record, or just do the Patriots win the division, make the playoffs? Where do they go this year if Cam Newton's healthy?
Such a tough year to decide because you want to give Belichick the benefit of the doubt, right? And just think that he's going to figure this out. But on paper, they're 6-10, 7-9 football team.
Yeah, without Belichick, sure. Yeah.
Right. So I would say somewhere around a 9-win team right now. Maybe they get to 10 wins and that ends up, they get a head-to-head against Buffalo, for instance. Maybe they win one of those head-to-heads or 2 of those head-to-heads and they're able to leapfrog them for the division title. But this is going to be a tough year for the Patriots to just kind of cakewalk in the division like we're so used to seeing. Not just because Tom Brady's gone. I think even with Brady, this was going to be sort of another grinded out type of season just because of what they have around him and the supporting cast that they have on offense. So again, I think it's a benefit in a lot of ways to have Cam there who can run the football and at least add that dynamic to it. So I'll go 9-7. It's I think realistic to think that they're about 6 or 7 win team on paper. And then you add Belichick and the coaching staff in there and you get 2 or 3 more wins out of those guys.
All right, Evan, great job as always. At EZ Lazar on Twitter, clnsmedia.com. You can check out the network there. And we'll be talking all about the Patriots all season long, and starting with our Monday show. And it should air late afternoon every Monday, so it should be available for everybody to watch. Usually early. Well, if you go and subscribe to our YouTube channel, that's the quickest way. You can check out our shows. Otherwise, they'll be posted on our social media channels. And, of course, at ourlads.com, usually every Monday night, unless they play Monday night, and then it'll be Tuesday night. So, Evan, I can't wait to wrap up the Miami game week 1. Alan Poupart will be our special guest, and it should be a lot of fun this season. Can't wait.
I can't wait either. I'm really looking forward to doing this.
Thanks, Evan. We'll talk to you next Monday.
Sounds good, Greg. Thanks.